Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, piki mai, kake mai. Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome David Robie to speak to us about his book, Eyes of Fire, detailing the journey of the Rainbow Warrior from Rongelap Island, where it picked up survivors of the nuclear experiments, to back to Auckland, where it was bombed, as we know, 40 years ago. And we sit at an interesting juncture at the moment. Last Wednesday was Hiroshima Day, the anniversary of the bombing of that city. Tomorrow is Nagasaki Day, the anniversary of the bombing of that city. Both horrific events, which we are now seeing recreated on our screens in Gaza. And I think so. I think we're at one of those conjunctures. 40 years ago, we were sailing, David across the Pacific, me round the Truxton with a couple of mates, to declare Aotearoa New Zealand nuclear free against significant opposition from the United States. We are now, in my opinion, back to the point where we have to go back to that fight that we had then to get to that point, because I've just been watching stories of what's happening on the nuclear issue in the world at the moment, and in my opinion we're at another critical point. So urgency is back with us. So thank you very much, David. I'm looking very much forward to hearing about the Rainbow Warrior story and your reflections on where things are at in the Pacific. So please welcome David Robie.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much, Mike, for that warm introduction. It's a real privilege and to be here tonight, and thank you so much that I've been invited to come along. And I want to thank Eugene Doyle, who's actually in UK at the moment. I've not actually met him at all, but we've sort of crossed paths online and virtually, as you do these days, with his website, Solidarity. And I think he recommended me speaking at. So I thank him for that, and I also thank Mike for planning, setting this up, and also like to thank Andre before we even get started. He's really set things up for us really well. Yes, as Mike mentioned, things are pretty horrendous and pretty dire at the moment. I think it's the most, 40 years on from the Rainbow Warrior period, but 80 years on since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Del and I, my wife Del and I, we visited Nagasaki. We haven't been to Hiroshima, but Nagasaki a few years ago, and that was a real experience to be there at Peace Park and be close to ground zero as it was back then 80 years ago. But the whole nuclear threats at the moment, sort of rekindled, if you like. Anyway, so I'll start off now, and I'm going to tell you a bit of a tale, a bit of a story about what I've been involved in and why I'm at this position right now. My Rainbow Warrior story really begins here, almost 19,000 kilometres away on the other side of the world in Paris, where the skullduggery began. At the time, I was a journalist for the French news agency, Agence France-Presse, in the mid-1970s. And I just completed a Trans-African Highway Odyssey, taking almost a year in two different stages, including crossing the Sahara Desert, but that's another story. Working for AFP, I discovered the Pacific through the back door, so to speak. I wasn't really very aware of Pacific issues before getting to Paris. It seems rather strange, doesn't it, really? My interest in African affairs took a back seat, and I started to develop some expertise in French colonial policy, especially the nuclear tests in the South Pacific, which had begun less than a decade earlier. And I started writing articles for media, the New Zealand Herald and the Listener and various other publications at that time. So I returned to Aotearoa, New Zealand in 1979, and after a stint as foreign news editor at the Auckland Star, I became a freelancer specialising in environmental and decolonisation issues. And in those days, the local Greenpeace office in Tamakika Makaurau was just a tiny setup in Nagle House, a stone's throw from the old district court. So when the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior happened on 10th of July 1985, and the death of Greenpeace photographer Fernando Pereira was a terrible tragedy. But a greater tragedy is the horrendous legacy of Pacific nuclear testing for the people of Rongelap in the Marshall Islands and also in French Polynesia. The associated military oppression in Kanaki, New Caledonia, and lingering secrecy. The next few slides, I'll give you a sense of shock, and many of you remember this at the time, of the French attack on an environmental campaign flagship. It was almost unbelievable at the time. A state terrorist attack in the heart of New Zealand's largest city, Auckland, was just astounding. The day after the bombing, on July the 12th, this was the New Zealand Herald, ran this banner headline. It was not yet known that the French government and its secret services were behind the attack, but I already had a strong suspicion, given my experience of reporting on French colonial policy in Kanaki, New Caledonia, and elsewhere in the region. 2 days later, on July the 14th, my first report was banner headlined in the National Sunday, the New Zealand Times, which is now the Sunday Star Times, one of the newspapers I was writing for at the time. It was one of the most difficult things that I had to write in my life, was the obituary for Fernando Pereira. We're actually quite close. He was a Greenpeace photographer, and I was an independent journalist on board, not a photographer in his class at all, but I was taking photographs as well as writing and reporting for the Herald. I had a weekly diary and things. But he had a cabin almost next to my cabin down below the propeller shaft, but we'll come to that in a moment. So I think, yes, now this is believed to be the last photo taken of Fernando Pereira alive, and it was taken the night before the bombing on July the 9th. And it was taken by John Miller, who's an extraordinary photographer who's chronicled protests for the last 50, 60 years or so in Aotearoa. And I can also be seen in the photograph, that guy in the white jacket. I didn't have a white jacket while I was on the trip, but I'd already left on the 7th of July. I'd packed my bags, gone ashore, and back into my shore legs, because I just lived a few blocks away from where the Rainbow Warrior was moored at Marsden Wharf. I forgot my passport, by the way. It was bombed by the Rainbow Warrior. That's another side story. Okay, this is my favourite photo of Fernando, taken at Rongelap in the Marshall Islands, and more about that shortly. But you see the photographs. It shows his cameras wrapped around his neck. I'll just come to that in a moment. This was the opening of my 8-page cover story of the tragedy in the Fiji-based Islands Business news magazine at the time. And the next two slides portray the two trajectories that I had as a journalist at that time. Later on, I was involved in the university, AT University, running journalism programs and things like that. But at this time, as I was working very much as a journalist, and between my time in the Auckland Star and when I joined actually the University of Papua New Guinea as head of journalism in 1993, this slide really depicts the environmental side of my work, and especially the series of Eyes of Fire books that came out. It's quite bizarre, I think, in many ways, because I have done other books as well, but this is the only book that's had a life of its own. It's had 6 editions in 4 countries, that might sound like a bestseller. It's not a bestseller. It's one that is, for those who are activists and those who really care about the world that we live in and so on. But it's interesting that it's had a life and had these various editions. They all had different covers, or more or less all had different covers, but most of the photographs came from the earlier editions. And now this slide shows my decolonisation, political journalism and media studies direction, including one that was actually translated into Swedish, which is this one here, Ökvålden blundar, which means the world closed its eyes. There's actually the Swedish translation of this one over here, Blood on their banner. And the strange thing is that the Swedish edition came out before the English one. But that's publishing, curiosities is another story to talk about too. Anyway, so let us start at the beginning with the humanitarian voyage to the Marshall Islands prior to the bombing. Why was I on board? The Rainbow Warrior, just to show you that picture there, is the Rainbow Warrior under sail from Hawaii, where I joined the crew as an independent journalist. Originally, it was a 49-metre Scottish fishing trawler called the Sir William Hardy, and the ship was converted into a campaign ship in 1977. And then it was converted into a sailing ship at Jacksonville, Florida in 1984, and this is where we came in with the Pacific Peace Voyage. Greenpeace's Elaine Shaw, and I'll come to her in a moment too, fought to get me on board the ship to bear witness on this voyage. So as one of the 6 journalists on board for the Rongelap mission, I was the only one actually from the Southern Hemisphere, and I was an unofficial crew member. The reality of that is that I was actually a crew member, and that I was on a watch, which meant I had to do everything like the crew had to do, but I was a journalist, independent journalist. So I wasn't named as a crew member, but that was the payoff that I could be on board, especially for the length of time that I was on, by doing the cruise work, of course. So anyway, between the United States and France, nearly 300 nuclear weapons have been tested, resulting in contamination of indigenous peoples. The indigenous peoples have borne the brunt wherever nuclear tests have been held. And the British are also to blame, but I'm focusing mostly in this talk, particularly on the US ones and the French. So the US nuclear tests were in the Marshall Islands between 1946, after the US dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They went straight into testing on the indigenous peoples in the Marshall Islands. 67 nuclear tests were detonated, 23 at Bikini Atoll and 44 at Eniwetok. And then the French nuclear tests, they started off in Algeria. And of course, Algerians fought a war of independence against the French. And so the French only managed to test 17 nuclear devices in the Sahara Desert. Then they were forced to look for another place. Well, of course, they weren't going to test them in France, were they? So they looked for a place as far away as possible. So French Pacific became the place, remote enough. 193 nuclear devices were tested in the Pacific from Mururoa, mostly at Mururoa Atoll. It's ended up like a cheese, Gruyere cheese with lots of holes in the whole atoll. And Fungatofa was the other one that they had a few tests there. So almost 8 decades since the US tests began, a year after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Pacific nuclear powers have still failed to take full responsibility for the region and adequately compensate the victims for the injustices of the past. The Pacific Islands Forum, it's a regional political group, and the Melanesian Spearhead Group, which is also a political group for Melanesian countries, and other pan-Pacific agencies, and the Australian and New Zealand governments still have much work ahead. So in my book, the new version of it, Eyes of Fire, the last voyage and legacy of the Rainbow Warrior, I've added the legacy in this latest edition, and Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister, has kindly written a prologue for it as well. So I've argued in this book that the New Zealand and Pacific Island Forum states should have vigorously supported the lawsuits of the Republic of the Marshall Islands in the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, and the US federal courts, and this has been an opportunity that's been lost. The three people who were critical for me being on board the Rainbow Warrior and taking on this assignment, which was quite a commitment at the time for me because I was a freelancer with a very unreliable and very precarious income. So I mentioned Elaine Shaw, who's here. She was the coordinator of Greenpeace at the time, and she was actually one of the key people that made that Pacific voyage with the Rainbow Warrior happen. Now, the other two people in the picture are Senator Jettanonjan, who's right on the left there. He was the parliamentary representative of the Rongelap the Rongelap Islanders in the Nittinjala, which is the parliament in the Marshall Islands. And then Steve Sawyer, who was the Greenpeace campaign coordinator. So you have a skipper on board Greenpeace campaign ships, and then you have a campaign coordinator, and they have the parallel roles. But Steve then later became the head of Greenpeace International. But he was a brilliant campaign coordinator at the time. And both of them were very instrumental in me being on board, and particularly for so long. I realised that this was quite a momentous occasion, so that it needed some record, really, of what happened. Anyway, so there's a map here. We'll show you this. This was the Pacific Peace Voyage to Rongelap Atoll, the Marshall Islands, and then on to Aotearoa. A voyage of more than 10,000 kilometres that would have been were involved, including 4 trips between Rongelap and Majato Island to relocate 320 islanders from Rongelap, whose community had been poisoned by nuclear test radiation, especially the Castle Bravo test, a huge blast on the 1st of March 1954. The dotted line, of course, they got to Aotearoa, and then the Rainbow Warrior was bombed, and so it didn't carry on to Moroa. But of course, the protest fleet did carry on with other smaller boats. My favourite photos of where are they? Yes, pictured here is the Rainbow Warrior crew members, and a few other people there. You see, the people that are also there are Rongelap Islanders who travelled from Hawaii back to the Marshall Islands, and I'm on the left in the Japanese headband. I looked a bit different those days. had a bit more hair. My favourite photos of Fernando was on the day that we actually arrived at Rongelap Atoll. And it's a small boom boom, what they were called. Boom boom because of the chugging sound of the small boats that the people had as runabouts. And we were met by one of these, and so we were taken on board. And so I took a photograph of Fernando there with his cameras. So this is a typical pose, like with this, several cameras hanging around Fernando's neck, and they were cameras that later led to his death when he went back down to his cabin on the Rainbow Warrior to rescue them after the first bomb had gone off in the engine room. He got caught by the second bomb, which was close to the propeller shaft, and both of our cabins were sort of down beside a very narrow stairway just above the propeller shaft, and got hit by the concussion or whatever, but entangled up with camera straps and so on. So here we've got the women of Rongelap welcoming the Rainbow Warrior crew ashore that's May the 17th, 1985. And their sign read, "Welcome to Rongelap. We love the future of our kids." And this is why they were willing to take down their entire village and ship it on the Rainbow Warrior to Majato Island on Kwajalein Atoll, which was the site of the US Star Wars military base. It's still a military base there now. Majato was right at the other end of the atoll, huge atoll, Kwajalein. Jettanonjan, who was their senator, actually approached Greenpeace and pleaded with them to help the people leave because they'd been basically shunned by the US government and the US government responsible for people being radiated in the first place. And then the Marshall Islands government was also not able or unwilling to do anything for them. So the Senator Onjine pleaded with Greenpeace, "You've got a ship, bring it to the Marshall Islands and bring our people to safety." Now, this is Bunny McDermott on the right here. She is being welcomed by the women on board Rongelap. She was a deckhand at the time on the Rainbow Warrior, and she was the only New Zealand crew member. I was also from New Zealand, but of course I wasn't. She later became the executive director of Greenpeace Aotearoa from 2005 to 2015. And later still, she became the co-director of Greenpeace International, 2016 to 2019. And she and her partner, Henk Hazen, who was also a crew member, he was from the Netherlands, devoted much of their life to helping the people of Rongelap. They went back to stay 3 months on Majato. So a real commitment. I must say that all the people that were in the crew in the Rainbow Warrior were incredibly dedicated to the people of Rongelap. And all of them who were in the crew said it was the best thing they'd ever done in their lives. And these were all activists, used to protest around the world, but they felt that this humanitarian voyage was completely different from anything else that had been done by Greenpeace, and they felt really part of it. I felt the same thing. Here we see the Rongelap Elementary School, and children with their head teacher, Asen Tima. He's in the red cap, and they're partially demolished school. So when we arrived there, the village was still there. We knew that they made the decision that they're going to leave, but they still had a meeting after we arrived. The whole village gathered to ensure, to basically make that commitment again, that they were going to take down the whole village. It's hard to comprehend going to a Pacific island like this, because land is so crucial to people's identity and their spirituality and so on. And so we were a little bit shocked to arrive that the whole village was still there, and we thought, oh. But no, in 3 days, the whole village was taken down. So the school was partially demolished there. So the only building that's left standing in the village is the stone church right down there in the inset. So for me, this photograph is symbolic of the whole Operation Exodus, as we called it. The loading of the Rainbow Warrior from the Boom Boom small boats with the people and dismantled homes, and looking back to shore with sadness and what they're leaving behind and the unknown of future ahead. It took 4 separate trips to Majato, spanning some 720 kilometres in total. All the buildings, sort of demolished and all packed onto the ship. And going to Majato was nowhere near as beautiful. And Rongelap was sort of like the classic Pacific tropical island. And Majato, we were going to had issues about water problems, less fish, and a whole lot of other issues to deal with. Anyway, a version of this picture was actually on the last cover 10 years ago for the Eyes of Fire book. 2 crew members on board the Rainbow Warrior, shown here, assisting Rongelap villagers come on board. And they're Andy Bearderman, he's the guy, bare-chested. He was a Swiss doctor on board, one of the crew members, but he's also the doctor. And second mate, Benny Hoffman from Germany, the bearded guy. He wrote a very inspiring diary of the voyage. So while the humanitarian mission was going on in Rongelap, the French were still carrying on their nuclear tests in the Pacific. And the prevailing mood was captured brilliantly, I think, in this cartoon by Trace Hodgson of the New Zealand Listener. And I gather he's going to be at the peace talks tomorrow, the RO peace talks. Anyway, this is focused on the socialist French president, Francois Mitterrand, at the time, and he was responsible for the ultimate order about taking out the Rainbow Warrior. The Rainbow Warrior never managed to carry on to the next stage of its mission, protesting against French nuclear tests, because it was bombed by French state-backed terrorists, as I mentioned earlier on. The Secret Service saboteurs, in an audacious and bungled Operation Satanique on 10th of July 1985, and this was the subject of the first book and remained the core in the other editions that came on. There's a lot of other material that was added on as well. Cartoonist Malcolm Walker summed up the damage that France inflicted upon itself and its reputation and standing in the Pacific with its nuclear tests at Moroa Atoll. The attacks on the indigenous Kanaks, the Rainbow Warrior sinking, and the DGSE Secret Secret Service poking itself in the eyes and also poking France in the eye as well. So in the 1980s, France was heavily involved in a bloody and repressive regime clampdown on the Kanak and Socialist National Liberation Front, the FNKS, and other pro-independence militants. This brutal period and the French imperial outpost coincided with the Rainbow Warrior bombing, and what happened to the Greenpeace ship needs to be seen against that backdrop of colonial paranoia and arrogance. Because one of the things that really amazed me at the time, when all the newspaper reports were being done here, it was sort of like, how could this possibly just happen to New Zealand? And it was sort of like out of left field, this attack on an environmental ship. But if the media, and our media does a terrible job in international reporting, as I'm sure many of you would agree, but back then there was so little, so the reporting of the Pacific really only concentrated on Polynesian countries. The Melanesian countries were virtually ignored. And so there was very little follow-up of what was actually happening in the 1980s in New Caledonia in particular, but also in French Polynesia too. So we had 3 major assassinations that took place in Kanaki, New Caledonia in the 1980s during what was known as euphemistically as les événements, the events. There were killings as well, but there are other killings as well, but I will just deal with the key ones for this discussion. First, we had Pierre de Clercq. I don't have a photo of him here, unfortunately, but he was Secretary General of the Union Caledonian, which was the foundation party of the FNKS, and he was gunned down in his home in 1981. 4 years later, his successor, Eloi Mashiro, and his lieutenant, because Eloi Mashiro was not only the Secretary General of the Union Caledonian, but he was also the Kanak Minister of Security. And so Marcel Nanaro was the lieutenant who was also shot by French military sharpshooters at La Fort. He was absolutely hated by the French colonial people that were living in New Caledonia. He was branded as the Robespierre of New Caledonia. Then there was the Uvira cave massacre, where 19 militants were killed by French military in 1988. And the survivors, there were some survivors, and they were tortured to death in a shameful act in French history. The shock of these and continuing incidents led to the Matignon Accord, where FNKS leader Jean-Marie Tjibaou and the pro-French leader Jacques Lafleur famously shook hands, and that laid the foundation for peace over the next 30, 40 years. Now, just to point out, so we've got the man in the blue shirt was Jean-Marie Tjibaou, who was assassinated. He was a great cultural. Had he survived, he would have been one of the great leaders of the Pacific. He was anyway, but he was not so widely known outside the French-speaking part of the Pacific. He would have played a key role in the Pacific Islands Forum and so on. And then that's jouirney, his deputy. They were assassinated together by another Kanak leader, Pastor Jubilee Weir. One of these extraordinary things that actually happened, I was in the Philippines in Manila and shared a hotel room with Jubilee Weir, the assassin. And months later, he shot both of these people. I had no idea. I mean, obviously he wasn't going to confide in me what his plans were, and I probably didn't have any idea he was going to do that at the time. But he was there for a peace conference in Manila. So if you look at the larger photo there of the group there, the leadership of the FNKS, they allowed me in to take some photographs of the meeting there. So Tjibaou was sitting there second from the left, standing as jouirney, and then the one with the head turned away is Eloi Mashiro. So 3 people assassinated in that one photograph. The reason why Jubilee Weir assassinated both these leaders is he claimed that they were being betrayed because of that agreement in the Matignon Accord, because the Kanak FNKS movement want full independence. Right, so I'm going to just show you a little brief little video. This was an interview, because, just to shoot fast forward now to last year. Remember all the riots that were happening in New Caledonia? and there's been peace right up until then. But the French government had 3 referendums. And I might talk a little bit about that a bit later, but the 3 referendums, 2 of them slightly voted no to independence. And then the third one, because of COVID, the Kanak population boycotted it. And so there was a massive no vote to 96, but only 40% of the people eligible to vote voted. And my personal view is that had that third vote took place, there could well have been a vote for independence, because between the first referendum and the second referendum, the vote went up, and much higher than the demographics, because the demographics are against the Kanak population. Anyway, just so I'm going to show just a little video clip. And this is a couple of weeks after the riot started in early May, and I just think that in that short moment that explains a little bit of the background before I carry on with the rest. Thanks, Andre. This is a publication called Green Left in Sydney, Australia.
Now, David, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for joining us today. We're in a situation where for the last 2 weeks there's been a revolt by Kanak people against moves by the French colonial power to try and weaken and undermine what has been seen as a long-running pathway towards independence. Could you begin just by laying out a sort of a basic introduction to the issues involved and what has been happening?
Well, basically, it's been portrayed in the media as just a sudden eruption, but it's been a long time building up to this. Essentially, Kanak indigenous people feel that they've been betrayed. And in fact, one of the Kanak officials that I've been in touch with used the word robbery. That she basically said, we've been robbed of our independence because of the French policies at the moment. The things were set in place really back in 2021 when the third referendum. Well, maybe I should jump back just even a little bit further, because we had all the really similar upheaval in many ways to now in the 1980s, and that stretched on for probably about 5 years in a rather sporadic way. And that led to eventually a massacre on Louvière Island, where something like 19 Kanaks were massacred by French troops after a hostage drama, which was the final episode probably of that period, which led to the Matignon Accord in 1988. That was the peace accord to bring some, resolution for the time being at that period. And then 10 years later, there was the new Noumea Accord, 1998, which really paved the way for self-determination and projected independence. And that was very peaceful from then on. Right up until the 3 referendums on independence that were part of the Noumea Accord. And the first referendum was in 2018, and at that point, the vote was against independence, but surprisingly not very high, like it was just over 50%, and 54%, I think it was at the time. 57%, in fact. And the projections from the French side was that, we're going to easily win this referendum. We're projecting sort of like something like about a 70% vote. So they were completely shocked by the result. Now, 2 years later, there was the second referendum, and the vote for independence went up, but it wasn't over the 50%, but it went up another 3%. So it was very close to 50%. And when given that the demographics are very much against the indigenous population, this was very hopeful. Well, then, of course, we came to the third referendum, 2021. And the FNKS, Kanak pro-independence movement and so on, decided that they were going to boycott that referendum because of the tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was enormous consequences for the indigenous people. Many lost their lives during that period. And under custom, there's mourning for a year And so the FNKS asked, look, asked the French government, can we hold off? Can we delay the referendum until we're able to sort of basically mobilise and prepare for that referendum? Well, of course, France at that point said no. And so the FNKS then appealed to the Constitutional Court, and they were rejected. So from then on, basically things have really nosedived, and there were warnings right back in 2021. Well, you're really going to be risking heading back to the, standoff in the 1980s, and seemed to be a very bloody-minded position of the French government on this, And
yes, thanks for that, Andre. Yes, so the situation was that the last few, because President Macron has been steering this along, but there's been a succession from 2021. A number of ministers have been appointed. I think it's about four ministers that have been appointed as overseas minister and have responsibility for changing the statute, because at the moment the statute, the Noumea one, is no longer valid. And it's due to have local elections in New Caledonia. So they can't really have the elections without a new statute. And there have been desperate attempts to negotiate between the pro-French population majority, even, and the Kanak minority. And most of the Kanak groups want independence, and the loyalists want to remain French. Now, things came to a head just in recent weeks. In fact, last month, when a new agreement has come into power. But I'll come back. I wanted to give you a bit of background because to show you the next few slides. So I'll come back to what's really happening at the moment, because it's critically important for the whole of the region of the Pacific. It's our nearest neighbour in the Pacific, yet there's virtually never any reporting, or hardly any reporting in the media here. I frankly find it quite staggering, really. Anyway, so just getting back on track with what was happening back then in the 80s, because I spent a lot of time travelling and reporting in the 80s about New Caledonia, and I was there for the first referendum in 2018, not the next two. But this was the photograph there is actually talking to militants in Toho in the northern part of New Caledonia. And the other guys, they're Australian journalists, because I was freelance in those days, so I had operating with a very low budget. So I would actually team up with journalists who had bigger budgets in the region to get around and that sort of thing. So I was with a team from Australia at the time. And this is a book I think I mentioned before that got translated into Swedish. I think it's a much better version than the English language version. It had a lot better photographs, and the cover was certainly, I think, more evocative of what it was really like at the time. This was 3 years later, in 1987, when reporting on New Caledonia for the 6th time at that stage. I was arrested by the French military. And when I say arrested, probably detained against my will. Because if you're arrested, you usually have a charge filed against you. I was not charged with anything. I hadn't done anything wrong, except that the French were particularly annoyed with me, and they just wanted to intimidate me and harass me. So they arrested me, they detained me, and handed me over to the gendarmerie, and I was interviewed, and they clearly were trying to sort of say, well, I was a spy. Well, how ridiculous is that? And this went on for a few hours. They refused to allow me to phone the New Zealand consulate in Noumea and so on. So it was a pretty disagreeable experience all round at the time. But the good thing was that the thing that they really were irked about was I took a photograph of that military. What the French were doing at that stage was setting up military camps, like they did in Algeria, set up camps in the villages. And then the soldiers go around at night, bang on doors, and they're ostensibly looking for draft dodgers and so on, because under French law, young guys have got to be drafted into the military service and so on. But they'd intimidate the villagers by doing this. And I'd read about this in French newspapers. And I thought, well, actually, that's a good story. No one's reported on that here in this part of the world, and yet it's all being reported about in Paris. So I thought, well, that'll be my mission on this particular trip. And I arranged to do appointments with the military commanders and so on. But I was tailed. Clearly I was under surveillance for 2 weeks. I did find out from information later that it was because of my Rainbow Warrior book, which had been published the year before. So I was sort of like under their watch and keeping me under. So this is what they call me a subversive or something like that. There was a story published in a local paper about a high-speed military chase. After me, it never happened. I mean, it's one of the things you realise is that as a journalist, we're supposed to be reporting about truth. There's a lot, and we have in the era of Trump, for example, what he refers to as fake news. I mean, everything about Trump is virtually fake news. But one of the things I did learn as a journalist over the years is that ostensibly we are supposed to be reporting the truth and upholding the truth, but a lot of media in different parts of the world, and particularly individual journalists, don't actually sort of follow the truth. They follow vested interests and so on. That's another issue. Anyway, I took photographs, and just down the road, the military, they had a roadblock, and they held me up at gunpoint, and one of the officers came over and said, "Monsieur Robie," and so on. I was like, how the hell did they know my name? But anyway, they handed me over to the gendarmerie, but I had 2 cameras, changed them, and I was supposed to hand over the film to the gendarmerie, and I saw them put it in a red wax sealed bag and so on. But I still had the real photographs in the other camera. So when I left, I was able to publish these photographs in various media. This was in the Islands Business, but there was an article in the New Zealand Times on front page about me being arrested at the time. I was trying to look for that for this talk, but I didn't find it at the time. Anyway, I think where we have now. Right. So this one, this is a photograph. I rather like this because of what it represents in French colonialism in the Pacific. You look at their faces and just look at, these are just ceremonial soldiers on parade outside the local parliament, the territorial assembly. Look at the weapons they're carrying and so on. I mean, it's a small country, small territory, less than 300,000 people. And at that time, in the 1980s, they had the French had military presence in New Caledonia far bigger than the entire New Zealand armed forces for a country of, at that stage, what would be 3.5 million, 4 million, 4.5, anyway, I can't remember what our population was then. But anyway, the proportion for less than 300,000 back then in New Caledonia would have been 190 odd thousand, something like that, and they had 6,000, 7,000 troops in New Caledonia. So that's so now this is a rather famous photo too, because and also the inset one, but it's of the FNK Security Minister Eloy Mashiro that I mentioned earlier on, who got assassinated, and this was taken. I took this just 2 months before he was assassinated by the French military, and this was the boycott of the local elections, which the FNK had decided they were going to boycott the elections. And I was going around taking photographs and so on, and I saw Eloy Mashiro here. I saw this action, I thought this nice photograph, but I didn't know what the significance was at the time, because a few minutes later I left him and then carried on to somewhere else, and he went into the Canala, which is a local town, to the town hall, and he chopped open the ballot box. This was their protest against the French organised elections, and then they set fire to all the ballot papers, and this was quite an amazing thing at the time. Now, I got the photograph also of the burning ballot papers, but it's a curious thing that is sometimes as a journalist you can just be lucky and be at the right place at the right time. So I was at the right place at the right time to see this axe, not having any idea what it was going to be used for. And I got the burning ballot papers, which made the front cover of a magazine. But this one I missed, which was the chopping up of the ballot box. That was a local journalist in Canala who supplied it to the local newspaper, Les Nouvelles. But both of these photographs became very widely used around the world for to portray the protest. Right, so this insurrection by the Canucks and the French colonial duplicity and betrayal in the time of the 1980s has been portrayed brilliantly in the film made in 2011, Rebellion. Now, I don't know whether anybody's seen this. It was in the New Zealand Film Festival later that year by Matthew Kasowitz. An absolutely superb film, and it's based around the story of a French hostage negotiator. And this was the time of the Uvea cave massacre. And the hostage negotiator was quite determined he could bring a peaceful resolution. He was quite convinced. In fact, he allowed himself to be taken hostage, the negotiator taken hostage for a period to communicate with the militants who were holed up in a cave on Uvea Island. And they had several gendarmes hostage. And anyway, the negotiator was quite convinced that he would get a peaceful resolution, and he failed in the end. He was betrayed by the military. The military, and this is a crack hostage negotiator from the CIGN elite force, and he had a long history of successful negotiations. And the militants trusted him. But in the end, he had arranged that a helicopter would go over, bring the hostages back, and the military command, they said, well, we're going to use this helicopter. Instead of, people to take they could send a medical team and so on as well, they sent in crack troops. And as soon as the helicopter arrived, they opened fire. And they didn't kill everybody. The ones who survived were then tortured to death. It was the most horrendous experience at the time. And anyway, the film itself was based around the book that the negotiator wrote. He resigned from the military. He was totally disillusioned and it was a political decision. We had Mitterrand and Chirac. Mitterrand, remember, it's the president who ordered the socialist president, I have to say it sadly. He was the one responsible for the order to bomb the Rainbow Warrior. He wanted basically to show an example of the militants and for the public back home in France. Now, the French version of the film has got a title, L'Ordre et la Morale, Order and Morality. And to me, I thought the French title is a bit closer to what the film really is about, because it's really about betrayal in so many different levels, Anyway, so my book examines many of the contemporary regional issues as well as the Rainbow Warrior and New Caledonia, because New Caledonia had a separate book called Blood on Their Banner, National Struggles in the South Pacific, which goes into the whole struggle in New Caledonia. So many of the libraries. Anyway, so just over a decade ago, in 2014, the Marshall Islands sued 9 world powers. And the late Tony de Brum, who was Marshall Islands Foreign Minister at the time, declared that the lawsuits were a final bid to establish a global conversation on nuclear disarmament. And he said at the time, quote, "Our people have suffered the catastrophic and irreparable damages of these weapons, and we vow to fight so that no one else on earth will ever again experience these atrocities." Now, New Zealand and the Pacific Island states should now require full investigations of nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands and French Polynesia to support a more robust compensation program than currently exists. New Zealand and the PIF states should also need to take a less ambiguous position on decolonisation in the Pacific, give greater priority to that issue, and seek a re-energising of the activities of the UN Special Committee on Decolonisation. This is especially important in relation to French Polynesia and Kanaka, New Caledonia, and also for Bougainville, as it approaches the end of the transitional political autonomy period, with a unilateral declaration of independence from Papua New Guinea slated for 1st of September 2027. Remember, New Zealand played a very important role in the end of the 10-year civil war that happened in New Caledonia. In Bougainville. I reported on the early couple of years of that war too. In the case of Kanaki, New Caledonia, the rioting and the harsh political crackdown by France, the goodwill and trust generated by 30 years of collaboration between France and the FNKS, and since the Noumea Accord, vanished almost overnight in the wake of the 2024 riots. The territory is just as polarised now as it was back in the 1980s. There is a sense among indigenous Kanaks that France has betrayed the self-determination commitment under the United Nations process. Now, the Bougainville deal, which I was alluding to a little bit earlier on, that, in the last few weeks that we have had some progress, but we don't know really what that progress is going to lead to in the end. So on July the 12th, what appeared to be a breakthrough in the stalemate over the future political status of Kanaki, New Caledonia, quickly ran into problems. The so-called Bougainville Accord, it's named after the city where the negotiations took place just west of Paris. This was signed by all parties at the meeting, convened by French President Emmanuel Macron. However, the problem for the Kanaks is that the agreement falls short of a plan for independence for the Pacific Territory. Many concessions were agreed to by all parties, and considerable trust would be needed going ahead. Now, an innovative move was the proposed creation of a new state within a state. In other words, a new state of New Caledonia would be a state within the state of France. It's quite unique. No proposal like this has happened anywhere in the world. There was a lot of talk about France mimicking the relationship with the Cook Islands, which of course is very controversial at the moment as well. But the special relationship that the Cook Islands actually has with New Zealand was often cited as an example of the the innovative move was in New Caledonia's oldest and most influential independence party, Union Caledonian, and the mainstay of the FNKS, formally rejected the deal, saying it offered the lure of sovereignty, but does not guarantee either real sovereignty or political balance. The future of New Caledonia probably depends on two men. This one here is the first and controversial. He's Christian Tien. He's a 57-year-old who was criticised by French authorities as the alleged ringleader of last year's pro-independence riots. He was elected president of the FNKS in absentia in August last year. He's one of 11 pro-independence leaders who are arrested and deported to France to await trial. Now, the irony here is that New Caledonia, rather like Australia, began existence as a French colony, as a penal colony. It's where France sent its revolutionaries from Algeria and Vietnam and so on to get them away from causing mayhem and causing problems for France. Send them off to New Caledonia as a penal. And so this was the reverse happening, that those who were advocating independence and went too far as France was concerned, shipped them back to France and put them in prisons all around France, so they had no family support, no connections with their supporters and so on. So he was held, Tien, he was held in a French jail for the past year and was released by the Court of Appeal on bail 2 months ago, but is barred from returning to New Caledonia. He denies the French allegations against him, but he was the leader of the Militant Coordination Cell for Field Actions, CCAT, the group accused by the French authorities. Now, the other key figure is Emmanuel Chibal. He's the son of Jean-Marie Chibal. Remember Jean-Marie Chibal, who was assassinated? He's 49, and he hasn't had a political career in the past. He was a cultural Doyen. He's the leader, he was the director of the Jean-Marie Chibal Cultural Centre for Kanak culture in Noumea all these years. But the Kanaks pleaded with him to go into politics because he has tremendous mana, like his father. So he was persuaded last year, and in short time he was elected as president of the Caledonian Union, the key ethnic status party. And then in July 2024 he became the first pro-independence New Caledonian to win election as a parliamentary deputy in the French National Assembly since 1986. So decolonisation is a big issue, but I'm just going to skip on here now and wrap up things a bit. I would like to sort of just skip a couple of these. Of course, this is quite important. On the 6th of July, 6th of August rather, not only was it Hiroshima Day, but that is the day of the signing of the Rarotonga Treaty, the nuclear-free Pacific Treaty. That's a bit of another story there, so I'll leave that one as well. But I'll just end up with Helen Clark, because she wrote the prognosis to my book, and she's a great advocate of the global multilateral system as it exists, and an antidote to the Trumpians of this world. But I'd like to sort of just quote something from her. The prologue that she says, "The UN Security Council is paralysed by great power tensions. The United States is unlikely to pay its dues to the UN under the Trump presidency, and others are unlikely to fill the substantial gap which that leaves. Its humanitarian, development, health, human rights, political and peacekeeping, scientific and cultural arms all face fiscal crises. This is the time for New Zealand to have a vision for a world characterised by solidarity and peace, and which can rise to the occasion to combat the existential challenges that it faces, including of nuclear weapons, climate change, and artificial intelligence." And the last few slides, I think I'll just skip over those. I'll just mention this cartoon because you can read about it in the book. So I love this cartoon. This was done by a cartoonist on Le Monde, Plantu. And it was done at the time that it was finally revealed and confirmed that Mitterrand was the person at the highest level in the Élysée Palace for the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior. So at this time, only presidents had the right to carry out terrorism. And the guy with the moustache, among all those students there in the classroom, the guy with the moustache is actually a journalist. His name is Edwy Plenel. He was an investigative police journalist on Le Monde, and he was the one that cracked evidence about the French government's involvement in the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior. He now publishes his own investigative website called Mediapart. So kia ora, thank you very much for me, and thank you for your patience. I think I've gone a bit over time. So.
Thank you very much, David. And one of my reflections, and very interesting opening up to us of the realities of French involvement in the Pacific, which of course was the whole story of the Rainbow Warrior, the story of the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior, I should say. It makes me think that perhaps rather than worrying about the so-called malign influence of China in the Pacific in our area, we should perhaps be worrying more about the malign influence of the Europeans. And I'm not just thinking of the French. The HMS Queen Elizabeth was in Darwin last week exercising with one of our frigates. Anyway, sorry. So people, any questions people would like to ask or thoughts? Or yes.
Oh, kia ora koutou, and kia ora David. That was a lovely talk, lovely walk down memory lane. I'd forgotten what arseholes the French were. I mean, that was really well described. Kenneth Roth, who headed up Human Rights Watch for 30 years, thinks that the only way you can change what bad governments do is by finding a lever. So if it's reputation, to threaten to humiliate them or humiliate them in the world of public opinion, and they can behave better. But you're an activist, so what do you think?
Well, to be to be honest, I'm a bit disillusioned myself at the moment because the things are just so horrendous in the world. Especially in Gaza. I mean, to me, it's so horrendous that the world allows this horrible, terrible thing to continue, and it's so relatively simple. I mean, cut off military arms, So, and the US, I mean, it's the roles play. But to pick up on your comment too, Mike, the French, of course, have this Indo-Pacific strategy in the region now, just like the US. I used to think, yes, if you embarrass and you shed a light on the terrible things and nefarious things that are happening, maybe then there'd be sort of a change. But it often doesn't seem to be that way at all. Sometimes the more you reveal, the worse things seem to get, But I think all we can do is have an optimistic approach and keep plugging it away at what we can do and hope that there's a groundswell. And I think there's definitely, if you look at Gaza, there's the optimism. The people all over the world, I mean, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, the Sydney Harbour Bridge last Sunday, it was astounding. I was watching a video someone took just going on the train across the Harbour Bridge, and the protest went on and on and on and on. It's just astounding, really. So there are good things happening, and we have to cling on to those and do what we can in our own small ways, and hope that the accumulation of that is going to make change.
Sorry, anyone else like to offer a question? Okay, you got it. Okay, well, I absolutely agree with what David said. I mean, today at lunchtime I was with about probably maybe 100 people outside the British Embassy in the rain, and then we went round and marched up Molesworth Street, which brought back memories because I'd been there in 1981 as well. And I think the takeaway point for me is, we might be small at the moment, but it's not like that everywhere else. And what people are seeing on their TikTok and their screens of the horror that is acting out in Gaza is changing people's minds, and people are starting to come together and are starting to say this is wrong and this must stop, and it is happening all around the world. So that's what I think we have to hold on to. So tomorrow, Tim Bollinger has set up Aro Valley Peace Talks in the Aro Valley, and that's one of the reasons why David has come down as well. So if you would like to come along at some stage, it's going to be running all the day. Wellington has been declared nuclear free. We'll declare Aro Valley nuclear free again tomorrow. So things will start from that. And the last thing I'd say is the other point is it's time to stop the enormous waste of money on weaponry, because that's where it all starts. And our government is supposedly going to spend an extra $9 billion, which it's going to fund out of stopping women being able to take pay equity claims. That's the sort of thing that I think we should be protesting about here. That's just a personal view. All right, so yes, and so there's some pamphlets you can pick up on your way out with some details about the Just Defence group that is starting to raise these questions, and will be at the Aro Valley tomorrow as well. So once again, thank you very much, David. That's been really interesting and informative, and thank you all for coming out on such a lovely, beautiful night.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just mention my book? I do have a few copies here, if you're interested. I'm selling on behalf of the publishers, Little Island Press, small publisher, and $50. My wife Del is over there. She's got the books there. So if there's anybody interested, I'd be happy to sign it or anything like that. Anyway, thank you. Shameless ad, I know.
You gotta do it. Sorry, mate.
Thanks.